5 years later, so in about 5 years, I had found that there was much more in each cancer patient's tumor than Fasciolopsis busci-lardi. There was a person who had published something on cancer in dogs, and they had always found a parasite, Onchocerca. It's just a filaria worm related to dog heartworm. And I thought, well, that's interesting. There is a parasite given as a, but I didn't pursue it because I didn't have a slide of that parasite. And I wasn't working on dogs. So I did, however, research each cancer patient's tumors to see what was inside, because I thought that made a lot more sense than injecting something into a mouse, or a rabbit or a rat, when we don't get our cancers by injection of anything. So it's convenient for the cancer researcher to be able to inject something into a bunch of mice and see whether the mice develop tumors. And that's what has been going on for all these decades. But they missed cancer completely that way. Maybe not completely, but for all, it's not useful. They may have learned what happens when you inject a carcinogen, whether it's benzene or carbon tetrachloride and all these chlorinated water byproducts that you hear about in the media now. They've all been injected in animals and found to, well, I wouldn't use the cause as part of the description of it, but those animals develop cancer. And when you find out how my system works, you'll see why those animals really develop cancer. Those carcinogens do contribute to cancer. The real cause they already had in them, however. And so when you add a contributor, you're going to get an increased incidence. So what did I find in everybody's tumor? Copper, cobalt, the metal. We don't normally have copper metal in us. We might be wearing it, but when it's in the body, it's in the form of a mineral, not the metal. Copper, cobalt, chromium, vanadium, which we don't have at all, not as an enzyme or anything. And there it was, vanadium. Inorganic germanium that we don't have. In fact, it's toxic. I found inorganic selenium, and that's very toxic too. And nickel. And nickel doesn't belong to a mammalian system. Nickel belongs to bacteria who use it in an enzyme of theirs. But that's what I found in tumors. And then later I found malonic acid, and I found PCBs, and I found benzene, and I found asbestos, and I found motor oil. And when I found wheel bearing grease, that was just too much. That is what is in the tumors. Every tumor. Every tumor. These things are in every tumor. So I decided at that point, and that was 99, that there has to be some kind of an overwhelmingly large source of this stuff. It has to be in food or water or the air. An overwhelmingly large source for all these things to have accumulated in the tumors of cancer patients, which is around 1/3 of the population. That's a large number. And I had been requiring water samples from every patient and their family members and friends, so that in case there was something wrong with their water, they would have some place to go to recuperate. I went back to my records at that point because I had tested the water for many things, but not knowing what to look for. I just had a list of toxins, and there they were, wheel-bearing grease, in the patient's water, but not in the family member's water or their friends. So I thought, I need to refine this statistic because this is pretty important. People are getting their cancers from their water, the drinking water. So that at that point I specified that I wanted kitchen hot and cold water. Okay, I did not yet specify water from the city because I presumed that the water in the kitchen was coming from the city. It's just one of those mistakes a researcher makes before you know very much. And there the difference was very clear, and I still found it so difficult to believe that the American drinking water could be giving us cancer, that I overreacted, and I wanted way too many cases. It really only takes about 5 cases in a row to become significant, or 6, at most 10, and I did 1,000. I overreacted to that research result. So I could, at this point, conclude that the cause of cancer was the drinking water that was coming through the kitchen cold or hot faucet for the patient. Now, why is there this difference between cancer patients drinking water coming into the kitchen and non-cancer patients coming into the kitchen? So that was the next project. And by 1999, I had that part figured out too. It's in the disinfectant of the water. All the water in the USA is disinfected by chlorination. First it's chlorinated with chlorine gas, and then as it gets closer to your house, it has to be monitored to make sure that the free chlorine level is up to, say, between 1 and 3 parts per million. It's required by law. Because the water agency, the FDA and EPA, they're very concerned about your water. And the law reads very accurately what you can and cannot add to potable, namely drinkable water. Potable water is the water that touches your food or your body. And that disinfectant or whatever else is used has to meet a certain standard, and that standard is given the name of NSF, which is an independent agency though. So that gets the stamp of water, of food quality. And it turned out, because at that point I went to the grocery stores and took all the different bottles, maybe 24 kinds of sodium hypochlorite, which in a bottle, which is what is added, which is added when the water gets close to your house. That's not what the original disinfectant is. The original disinfectant is chlorine gas. And that was never the problem. There was no difference in the water between cancer patients and non-cancer patients when chlorine gas was added. But when sodium hypochlorite was added close to your house to make sure it came up to that few parts per million, that's when there was a difference. And the difference was in whiteners and brighteners and all those other things that you would find in laundry bleach instead of food grade bleach. National Standards Foundation, NSF, is what food grade bleach is stamped with. And you couldn't find that anywhere on the grocery shelves. But right now, it has arrived on the grocery shelves. I'll talk about that later when I'm working in the workshop. I don't want to be handed a summons right here. Make sure you watch me go out of the door safely. You see, it isn't legal to go to the grocery store and buy a bottle of laundry bleach to add to your drinking water. But a great deal of that was going on. However, that was 5 years ago, 1999 to 2000. And that leaked out, as things do. And the water departments got notified to be very careful about following the correct regulations on what kind of chlorination is added to the water. And they have improved tremendously. They have improved tremendously. But the incidence of wrong chlorination has increased. The cancer rate has increased. And it's because people are doing this to themselves by adding a filter or a water softener. Now, I hope 20 of you gather around me as I leave today, after telling you that. I'll need 20. Because all the filters on the market are disinfected with the non-food grade bleach. Now, I said all, but it isn't all. I don't have the exact statistic because I haven't tested in a scientific way. I have not tested every brand, every amount, every shape and size. You see, there are a lot of variables to such an experiment. But I can say that roughly there are about 5% of the food-grade chlorinated filters on the market and about 95% of the others, so your chance is about 0. That's not good news for the filter industry, so watch out for me, okay? I have to get back to Mexico. And the other big source, maybe even bigger, and maybe even more hazardous to tell you, is in water softeners. Now, maybe there are no regulations. I don't know the detail yet. I just want you to know to grab those things off your water pipes. Because the water departments who used to do the most of this are now doing the least. They have shaped up wonderfully. I would say that the water departments are only responsible for about 10% of this kind of behavior, whereas they used to be responsible for about 80%. So, and there never was any hope in going to the water department for any change. You can imagine that. And there still isn't. But at least it's down to about 10%. But one thing you know, and one thing we immediately tried out, I immediately tried out in Mexico, of course, and this is how I could say what a high success rate we had. Of course, we took them off their water immediately, substituted water without, and now we use water without any chlorination. There are other ways to sterilize your water. Why overchlorinate yourself and oxidize yourself and so on and so forth?